Hello students, welcome back to the lesson on Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. In this segment, we are going to discuss about some key elements of the novel such as setting, plot, and characterization. Let's look at the setting of the novel. When and where action takes place and in which socio-political, economic, or cultural context. As the map clearly shows, the story is set in pre-colonial Igbo land, which is located in southeastern part of modern Nigeria. As you may have noticed, the action takes place in a fictional village called Umofia. Umofia is not a real village but an imaginary one, which is created by Achebe. Can you think of an example of another fictional town? Yes, Malgudi in R.K. Narayan's. So similarly, this is also a fictional village. In the second part of the novel, the protagonist, Okonko, moves to Mabanta, which is his motherland. In relation to time, the story outlines the time period immediately before and after arrival of white missionaries in Africa in 1860s. When we pay attention to the socio-cultural context, as it was mentioned before, Achebe takes a great effort to depict Igbo culture in detail. This is a very important aspect of the novel, both in terms of setting and the theme. The entire first section of the novel is devoted to showcase the complexity of Igbo culture. It is a patriarchal or male-dominant society relying on physical prowess or strength. It is also highly stratified. We can see the coexistence of different social stratas. Titled men at the top, then the untitled, and the outcast called Ozu at the bottom. Okonko, his wives and children, shows how polygamy works. And in the second part of the novel, when Okonko is in exile, we get a glimpse of how the Igbo extended family system works. We can see a system of shared governance. Egugu, the masked spirits, clearly resemble the judicial system of this society. The language itself is different and rich with proverbs, idioms, folklore, chants, oral poetry, etc. And we can see the Igbo religious practices as well. There is a supreme god, Chukwu, Ani the earth goddess, and the personal god, Chi. And there's the oracle or Agbala. We clearly see the myths and superstitions existing in this society. Achebe seems to portray strengths and weaknesses of his culture. Moving on to the next slide, I have compiled some photographs which depict the various aspects of Igbo culture here. And I strongly recommend you to make a note of the various cultural practices, customs, religious beliefs, and superstitions found in the novel Things Fall Apart. Next, we will look at the plot. I hope you are very much familiar with the novel by now. Okonko is the protagonist or the central character of the novel, and it shows how Okonko, his family, and their community react to the sudden cultural changes brought by British imperialism. To a certain extent, the novel deviates from the structure of a Western novel. Achebe brings forth a tripartite structure, meaning that it is divided into three parts. In the first part, we are introduced to our protagonist Okonkwo and also Igbo customs and traditions in detail. The second part of the novel features Okonkwo's exile from Umuofia to his motherland Mabanta after his unintentional murder of a clansman. And most importantly, it highlights the arrival of Christian missionaries in Igbo land. The third or final part outlines the downfall of Okonkwo and disintegration or collapse of traditional Igbo society. As you know, the most fascinating aspect of literature is that it is open to varying interpretations. The plot development of Things Fall Apart can also be interpreted in multiple ways. For example, since exposition is what introduces the key background information to the story or the narration, the first part of the novel can be considered as the exposition. It spans for first 13 chapters, including Okonkwo's rise to greatness from nothing, Ikemefuna's arrival in Umuofia and his subsequent murder, the judicial system which is in force in Igbo society, the customs which are related to marriage, deaths, burials, the festivals and celebrations like the Week of Peace or New Year Festival, and most importantly, the social hierarchies in Igbo society and their religious beliefs. When we talk about inciting incident, if you take Okonkwo's struggle with fate into consideration, the reversal of fortune occurs when Okonkwo accidentally kills a clansman at the end of the 13th chapter and then was exiled to Mabanta, his motherland. But at the same time, if you consider cultural disintegration, then of course one can argue arrival of white missionaries as the inciting incident. In the rising action, the tension of the novel becomes more intense as the conflict escalates between Igbo natives and those who have converted to Christianity. As a result, we see Nuye, Okonkwo's eldest son, converting to Christianity, and Egugu, a masked spirit of Igbo religion, is unmasked by an overzealous convert, which is considered a sacrilegious act. The natives retaliate by burning down the church, and later Okonkwo and his clan leaders are imprisoned, tortured, and humiliated in the hands of the white government. The story reaches its climax when Okonkwo kills a court messenger in a fit of rage and ultimately realizes that Umuofia would not go for war. The falling action of the novel is marked by Okonkwo's suicide, the downfall of a great man. The resolution offers us a glimpse of the Igbo society which has collapsed, and of course, the history is rewritten by the white colonizers. Next, we will look at the conflict. As you know, it is the conflict which moves the story forward. There are two types of conflicts, internal and external. Internal conflict in the novel is evident in Okonkwo himself. He's constantly struggling or wrestling with his fear to appear weak or effeminate. When it comes to external conflict, it is between the Igbo natives and European colonizers. But we see intra-group conflict or conflicts within the Igbo society itself. For example, the native Igbo religion or religious leaders versus converts. Titled men versus untitled. The citizen versus Ozu or outcast. Men versus men, and even older generation versus the younger generation. In Okonkwo's personal sphere, father and son conflict is apparent between Unoka and Okonkwo on one hand and Okonkwo and Noye on the other. At the same time, Okonkwo seemed to have a constant struggle with his fate. Despite his strong desire or obsession to prove himself, he ends up committing a female crime and even ultimately committing suicide, an utterly disgraceful death according to Igbo beliefs. Next, we will look at another important aspect of the novel, characterization. Okay, once again, let's do a small activity. Let's watch another video at the courtesy of cosehero.com and create a short note on major characters of the novel. Don't forget to find the relevant quotes from the novel to support your character profiles.
There are many characters in Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart. Key among them are Okonkwo's family and his closest friend. The novel's main character, Okonkwo, is a respected leader who has overcome his father's reputation to achieve great success as a warrior and farmer. Hyper-masculine and fearful of feminine weakness, Okonkwo is quick to anger, often violent, and ruled by one passion: to hate everything his father had loved. This rigidity harms his family and society. He's ultimately unable to adapt to the changes brought by Europeans, and he commits suicide rather than endure colonized society. Though a gentle and gifted musician, Okonkwo's father, Unaka, is judged by the clan as lazy. His crops were poor because he preferred playing his flute and drinking wine to farming. He was also seen as a coward because he was afraid of war. When Unaka died, he was in debt to all of his neighbors. His son, Okonkwo, is driven to hate everything about him. Ikemefuna comes to the clan as payment for a murder committed by one of his tribesmen. The elders place him with Okonkwo, who puts his first wife in charge of the boy. Ikemefuna eventually comes to feel at home in Umofia, and Okonkwo and his family grow to love him as a son and brother. Okonkwo's oldest son, Nwoye, develops an especially close bond with Ikemefuna. Okonkwo betrays this love by delivering the fatal blow in Ikemefuna's murder. Okonkwo's oldest son, Nwoye, experiences the full brunt of his father's discipline. Okonkwo fears that Nwoye will grow up weak and feminine like Unaka, so he is particularly hard on him. Nwoye develops a close bond with Ikemefuna, but when Ikemefuna is killed, Nwoye cuts himself off from his father. With the arrival of European missionaries, Nwoye breaks entirely from his father's influence and converts to Christianity. Ekwefi is Okonkwo's second wife. She was attracted to him when she saw his legendary wrestling victory. She couldn't marry him then because he was too poor, but once he achieved success, she left her husband for Okonkwo. The loss of her first 9 children forged a close connection to him, and Okonkwo shows more care and concern for her than his other wives. Ekwefi is particularly close to her only child, Ezinma, and treats her daughter like an equal. Ezinma is Okonkwo's only child with his second wife, Ekwefi. She's close to her mother and Okonkwo's favorite. He shows a special connection to her and respects her boldness, often wishing she were a son. Oberika is Okonkwo's closest friend. Like Okonkwo, he has achieved great status within the clan. He too has multiple wives and children. During Okonkwo's exile from Umwofia, Oberika cares for his land and property. Oberika is more nuanced in his thinking than Okonkwo and able to express himself. He rebukes Okonkwo for participating in Ikemefuna's murder, tells him to have patience with his children, and cautions him about the power of the missionaries.
I hope that was informative. Apart from what we have learned here, I would like to draw your attention on some important points, especially on Okonkwo's characterization. Those who have studied Shakespearean tragedy, King Lear last semester, would easily recognize the term tragic hero. What is a tragic hero? A character with heroic traits as well as some fatal flaws which causes his downfall at the end. So do you think Okonkwo is a hero? Or is he a villain? Or would you call him a tragic hero? It's open for interpretation. In this slide, I have listed out some character traits of a tragic hero as found in Greek tragedies. I hope this would help you to decide. At the outset or at the beginning, the character is in a high position, known for his greatness or achievements. But due to a particular weakness or flaw in his character, we see a reversal of fortune. It leads him to his downfall, and ultimately the audience is overwhelmed by pity and fear because of his tragic end. Do not worry too much about the Greek terms here, but my question is how relevant you find some of these character traits in Okonkwo's characterization. Your next task is to analyze this quote from Chapter 2 of Things Fall Apart and identify the character traits of Okonkwo as depicted in the novel. Let's move on to the next slide. I'm going to introduce a relatively new literary term, foil. We use the term foil to a character in literature who is presented as a contrast to another character. Here, the purpose is to highlight certain aspects or character traits of the other, possibly the protagonist. The classic example is Dr. Watson in Sherlock Holmes or Draco Malfoy in Harry Potter. Having said that, I want you all to closely analyze Okonkwo's character in comparison with Unoka, his father, and Oberika, his friend. Compare and contrast these characters and see whether they stand as foil to Okonkwo. Gender roles in Things Fall Apart are quite interesting. Although there is a saying in Igbo, mother is supreme, the women in this society seem to exist in the fringe of the social hierarchy, not involved in any decision making. Okonkwo's wives are always victims of domestic violence, despite the fact that this is a society which looks down on beating women. Generally, the women seem to have a rather ambivalent position in Igbo society. In this context, the two characters, Ekwefi, the second wife of Okonkwo, and their daughter Ezinma, stand out as bold, strong women. The closest we find as an antagonist in the novel are the white European colonizers. They symbolically represent the process of colonization. Mr. Smith and Mr. Brown are white missionaries, and it's interesting to compare their attitude towards natives and their religion. However, it is Mr. Smith's unyielding religious policies and practices that increase the tension between natives and those who have converted to Christianity. Ultimately, this led to Okonkwo's failure and also the disintegration of Igbo culture. If we look at District Commissioner's character, he becomes a symbol of Europeans' view of Africa and its bias. I hope you have a clear understanding about the setting, the plot, and also the characters in Things Fall Apart. Before we move on to the next segment of the novel, there are some study questions for you to attempt.